Hey, that's right. December 16th is the birthday of the Greater Western New York region. December 16th, 1787, with the signing of the Treaty of Hartford, established the perimeter lines of the Greater Western New York region. On the east is the preemption line. On the west, well, actually, the west wasn't really quite confirmed until the War of 1812, but that's another story. When we talk about origins, the biggest question that I've had from people is, where did the first people come from? We're going to be talking about that on this week's episode of the State of Greater Western New York Report, which, as always, is brought to you by...
Each week, our community makes history. Each week, you make history. And each week, there's only one source to turn to for the first take on history. You know what that is? Subscribe to the Sentinel right now to discover the history being made in your own backyard. The Mendon Honeoye Falls Lima Sentinel. More than just your news, it's your history. Welcome, everyone, to this edition of the State of Greater Western New York Report. Join us each episode as we discuss fantastic topics ranging from history to science to the strange and the wonderful, as well as the treasured spirit with which our region has infused America. We challenge you to consider all things Greater Western New York, from our region's very beginnings to how it inspires, how it empowers, and why it is so admired. Here's the host.
It was so good we want to do it again, don't we? Well, hey, let's just go right to the beginning of the show, because that's really what you're here to see. You don't want to hear the talk all over again.
Report, Chris Carosa.
Hey, that's me. Ha! We're just doing great here. Welcome to the show, and let's zoom in a bit and look at today's guest. And how about that? We have a clean day there night, and I lost the studio light, so we're gonna get the picture off me, and we're gonna go right to our guest. He's Michael Beardsley. He is the historian from the town of Sullivan in New York, and he's also, what do you call it, an avocational archeologist? Is that how you describe yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself, Michael, and how you got interested in what you were doing.
Sure. Yeah, an avocational archaeologist is a fellow who's an archaeologist, but he's not, he gets dirty, he gets bug bitten, but he's not burdened with a paycheck. It's all volunteer. So that's an avocational archaeologist.
So how did you end up doing this?
Back when I was about 12 years old, my dad was our scoutmaster, and we decided to do a weekend retreat camping on Frontenac Island. So if you have that picture, we can put up Frontenac. On Frontenac Island, we got out there, and the boys said, Dad, to my dad, we would like to go fishing. And Dad said, well, you'll have to dig some worms. Well, the guys came back, they were all dejected, and they said, Mr. Beardsley, we can't find any worms. All we can find are these. And they had handfuls of beautiful arrowheads. Well, Dad and I were hooked. And come to find out, we were camping on what is called the Island of the Dead. If you go to the next slide, the Island of the Dead, Frontenac Island, was actually dug by William Ritchie, our state archaeologist, back around World War II, but they were never able to finish. They figure the site is about an acre, and that over 150 burials were found on that site. The State Museum took all of the burials, but if you could go to the next slide, some of the pieces that we've found on Frontenac Island include all of these points that you see right here. You know, I call them arrowheads, but they're not really. When this island was occupied, the bow and arrow hadn't been invented yet. So every one of these are spear points, tall or big or small. And as you can see, they have different basal forms, some of them. Some are very similar. And each culture in New York did us a favor. They had different bases for their arrowheads, for their projectile points. So by finding a projectile point, you can tell what culture was there. So if you want to move on to the next, we can talk about the first Americans. You know, back when we were all, most of us, in high school, we were taught that the first Americans came across the Bering Land Bridge about 13,500 years ago. They were called the Clovis people, and they wandered through the ice, the gap in the ice sheet. They came down to the middle part of what is now the United States. And when they broke over the horizon, there was nobody there. It was all just beautiful, uninhabited except by lots of game and fowl and fish. It was a paradise. Well, that's what we were taught. And it wasn't true. Science got in the way. And little by little, they started finding sites. Archaeologists started finding sites that were older than 13,500 years ago. There were so many archaeologists who were absolutely enamored with the Clovis first theory that they said, oh no, this new material, this isn't right. This is wrong. Well, now there have been so many sites that have been found that are 14, 16, 18,000 years ago, even down as far as southern Chile. So the question of who the first Americans were is still anybody's guess. And that's what makes this so much fun. Literally almost every month there's more discoveries. So how did they get here? Well, the Clovis people did come through the corridor, but it's thought now, if you see the green line, that people from perhaps northern Japan, perhaps Siberia, also used boats, not very big boats, but they hugged the shoreline called the Kelp Highway. The kelp grows, and where kelp grows, there's fish and there's birds, and they eventually floated themselves down to California. Some got off in California. They were pretty smart. Others went all the way down to South America. Now, there's another theory called the Solutrean theory, and that's the purple line coming over from Spain and Portugal through that area. The Solutrean culture was over there. Now, you look at that and you say 23,000 years ago. Chris, if you could show the next slide.
Sure.
There is this is what's called the Sinmar blade, and those are mammoth teeth. Well, 60 miles off the coast of the Chesapeake Bay, 60 miles, a trawler, a scallop trawler called the Sinmar, was trawling along the bottom, and when they brought up their scoop, there was mammoth tusks, mammoth teeth, and beautiful spear points, just like you see right here. Well, they got the materials back, and they dated them to approximately 22,000 years ago. Now, this blew everyone's mind. So who the first Americans were, and I'm going to say this is probably the earliest absolute definite dating that we have, is this. Now, the Sinmar point looks a lot like the type of spear points that they had in France and in Spain. So there's a theory, some people believe in it, some people don't, that some of the first Americans also came from Europe. If you could do the next slide, please.
Well, before we go that, we just have a couple of questions on this map here. Can you,
Sure.
What is the blue, the dark blue one, and how does that different than the red one?
Okay, the dark blue line, some people are saying that there may have been another gap in the Laurentide ice sheet, and that people may have come in through that way as well, about 15,000 years ago. But again, we've now got dates that go back even earlier than that. Paisley Caves in Oregon, the Galt site down in Texas, and then Thomas Dillahay's sites down in Monteverde, Chile. So these are just some examples of some of the probably many different incursions into the New World.
So the 20,000, 30,000, 23,000 years ago, the glaciers were still around. I mean, they were probably off peak at that point, but they were still around. So the theories of the purple and the green lines, because I don't remember your names, they would be not traveling over land, but over the oceans, being close to the land, probably close to the glaciers. Correct? Is that how they came, or is that the theory of how they came?
Absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And even at the peak of the Laurentide ice sheet, places like Maryland, Virginia, down through that way off the Chesapeake, they weren't covered with ice. And once the early Native Americans got past, Washington, Oregon, the ice was gone, or there was no ice there. So these people could have landed on dry land, and we're going to get to more of this shortly.
Okay, let's go to the your next slide, which is the drawing.
Okay, what we have here, again, the life of the Paleo people was a tough life. The average lifespan was about 35 years. Some of the early Paleo people did hunt mastodons, mammoths. They had a very distinctive spear point called a Clovis point. There are variations on that. But if you look in the middle of the screen, you can see the point and you can see that groove up the middle. People used to say that was a blood groove. It's not. But it was a way to adhere the point to the shaft of the spear. But when they came over here, again, there were camels, there were horses. All of these were good eating. These people were on tundra, so it was cold. They were nomadic. They were moving all the time. And there were any number of creatures like our friend the saber-toothed tiger down there. Saber-toothed tiger, short-faced bears, American lions, who would just love to eat them. So life was tough. If you could show the next slide. Yeah, they did not, because they were on the move. Usually most of your paleo sites, if people stayed 8-10 days, it was a long time. And these are some of the structures that they would have made. Now, that's why finding paleo sites for the paleo people is so hard, because they were always on the move. Usually the sites are very ephemeral, not much left to find. Usually maybe just some scattering of lithics, flint chips, maybe, if you're lucky, some scrapers and points, things like that. So they're very hard to find. If you could show the next slide, please. All right. Now, a very sad note is that you will never find the first Americans in New York State. Now, why is that? Because, as you said, Chris, New York State was covered with ice until about 15,000 years ago. So the earliest Americans were already here. Native Americans were already here. They could not come to Western New York, Central New York, Pennsylvania, because we were under ice. But then something happened, and it was kind of amazing, and it was called global warming. You probably have not heard of it, but the temperatures got warmer. And this has happened any number of times over the millennium. If you could show the next slide, please. Give you an example. We talk about sea levels rising and falling. This is a sea level map from about 15,000 years ago. And you can see the map of the United States. Now you can see the striped areas represent what you could have walked on. That's dry land 15,000 years ago. So the ocean levels were way down. Now you say, where'd the water go? Well, of course, the water was locked up in glaciers. You literally could have walked from Galveston, Texas, over to Key West and never got your feet wet. Now you see how the Sinmar artifacts ended up 60 miles off the coast of the Chesapeake. That's where anybody coming that direction would have landed. So way out in what is now covered water, because once the glaciers receded, the water went back into the ocean. Same holds true for California. A lot of the early sites we feel and fear are underwater because that's where they would have landed. They wouldn't have landed in Santa Barbara or Venice Beach. They were way off the coast. So some of the earliest sites, underwater archaeology right now is probably the hottest aspect of archaeology. If you could show the next slide, please. This is a LiDAR view. LiDAR is a type of radar which takes away all of the trees and everything and shows us what our area would have looked like. And this is now about 13,500 years ago. Great Lake Iroquois is what you're seeing here. You're looking at the far eastern edge. And for those of you in Western New York, you're looking at Onondaga County. If you look really close in the middle of the screen, you can see Syracuse. You'll see a little island at the northern part of Madison County, and that with the number 130. and 130 is right around where our sites, the Crowfield sites, are. So any early Americans coming into New York State, this is what they would have seen before Great Lake Iroquois receded to what we know today as Lake Ontario. If you could show the next slide, please.
Is that the Genesee River on the left of here?
No, we're not over far enough. You're looking at Cayuga County. There's Auburn, Cayuga County. So you're seeing the beginning of Cayuga Lake. You're seeing what Great Lake Iroquois was until the ice receded. And this is kind of funny. Great Lake Iroquois was really big. Now, why is that? Because the St. Lawrence River was still blocked with ice. So the ice was melting, but the St. Lawrence kept the ice from draining, or the water from draining out. Once the St. Lawrence Channel opened up, the archaeologists say it was like pulling a plug on a bathtub. The area of what Great Lake Iroquois was drained so fast that it actually, Lake Ontario became smaller than it is today. So it's amazing how the topography changed. But no, you're looking at central New York.
Okay.
And this is that red line is what's called the Onondaga Escarpment. You guys have got it out in western New York. We have it in central New York. It goes up into Canada. The escarpment is where the land rises. So why is this important? Because on the Onondaga Escarpment is full of Onondaga chert, which is flint, and it was very prized as a tool stone. So that's why a lot of the early Native Americans came to our area, because we had this very prized Onondaga chert, and it runs right along the edge of the escarpment. That's still there, obviously, to this day. So
all right,
this would be a good break point.
Yeah, so we'll break here, and we'll put Mike back on the screen so we don't have to see the Frontenac Island. There he is. So we'll be back after this message on the State of Greater Western New York Report.
Through the mists of time, nature and man have both created and buried treasures beyond the imagination. With the ages, these riches slowly dissolve into mere myths until they are forever forgotten. But there are those brave souls who tirelessly cling to the truth, ever seeking to discover the undiscovered, to reveal what has always been there, to uncover the hidden gems of a land thought forsaken but loved by millions. 50 Hidden Gems of Greater Western New York. Discover the secrets in your own backyard. Buy your copy now at 50hiddengems.com.
There we go again.
To this edition of the State of Greater
We
Western
keep
New York
going with
Report.
this
Join
because
us
we're just
each
so
episode
great
as
and
we discuss
excited about it.
fantastic topics
We're
ranging from
already
history
here. This is
to
a backup
science, to the
for me
strange and the
because my
wonderful,
main
as well
studio
as
is
the
kind
treacherous
of
spirit with which our
on the
region
blink
has
right
infused
now.
our
So
own.
let's just go to this one. So there we go. Welcome back to the State of Greater Western New York Report. Things are really hairy there. This, by the way, is going to be we're going to take a break between Christmas and New Year, so we won't be back till January. But today we've got a guest who's been very interesting, and you know what? He's so interesting, I think we'll go a little bit longer than 30 minutes if it's okay with Mike, because he's telling us some really cool stuff. So, Mike, let's go back to you and continue with your story of what's going on in the world around us. When we left off, you were talking about the Niagara Escarpment. So why don't we take it from there and go to the next slide, which is da-da-da. What's this?
Okay, this is a slide. Now, the Paleo people, the earliest Paleo people that were in New York State were the Clovis people, and they figure about 13,500 years ago. As I said, the glaciers had melted by then. The glaciers were still up in Canada, and it was cold. And this was like a tundra. Very few trees. The winters were brutal. So these were nomadic hunters. Now, there were several different cultures that came through. The last of the fluted point makers, the last of the paleo cultures, was a group called Crowfield, just like it sounds, Crowfield. The Crowfield group is a very mysterious group, very few sites found. I was really lucky, thanks to my wife, who kind of pointed it out to me, to find a cluster of Crowfield sites right here in northern Madison County. Now, the Crowfield people were here about 12,200 years ago. By this time, the mammoths and mastodons were pretty much gone. There may have been a few left, but these people were caribou hunters. Caribou, again, for this time of year, are reindeer, as you know. So these people spent their lives following the herds of caribou. So they had a very symbiotic relation with the caribou. Most people think, well, they had to have the caribou to eat, and that is very true. But another thing that they had that was so cold that if you didn't kill your share of caribou and get the caribou hides for your clothing, you would definitely freeze to death. So these people were skilled hunters. They were on the move all the time. So you say, Mike, why do you have a cluster of perhaps as many as 6, 8 sites, Crowfield sites, when there's only like 5 known in the entire world? What was going on in Madison County? The answer to that is we really don't know. We figured that these people probably would have to come together. They traveled in small bands, okay, small, maybe 10, 20 people at the most, family bands. They would have to come together perhaps once a year to exchange ideas, to get wives, and maybe just to celebrate and that they haven't seen each other in a while. You can see the gentleman standing on the ledge is using an atlatl, and that is a spear thrower. You could take a spear and throw it with your hand, and the chances of you killing a caribou are slim and none. But once you use that spear thrower, which extends the length of your arm, now that adds additional force, and you can be a heck of a hunter. If you'd show the next slide, please. So these are the known Crowfield sites. The type name for Crowfield site comes over in Canada and Ontario, and that is up there in the smaller numbers. In New York State, we only have 2. My sites are number 10. Number 11 is not really a site. Number 11 was a point, a Crowfield point that was found on a golf course. So no sites were found. So we've been digging on our Crowfield sites with the New York State Museum, and they've been wonderful to work with, going back to 2015, because this is such a special discovery of these sites. And, you know, all of New York State can be very proud to be the home of this Crowfield group. If you'd go to the next slide, please.
Before we do that,
go ahead.
The Crowfields were migratory. They came across New York State from the west to the east. Is that
right? Now we don't know that. We don't know whether Madison County was the birthplace of the Crowfields or if it was in Ontario. There's only 2 clusters, I guess you'd say, over in Ontario, north of London, out in that neck of the woods, and our site in Madison County. We have a chance to be digging or to be able to date. No Crowfield site, Chris, has ever been dated, not specifically carbon-14 dated. We have some organic material that we dug up, and I'll tell you about that in just a moment. So we may be able to get the first dates, but these people are so enigmatic, we don't know where they started from. They may have started in Canada and came across, or they may have gone the other way. They may have started in Madison County and gone to Canada. Why
has no dating taken place?
Because there's so few sites, and most of the sites are not like ours. Ours has we've been able to find a habitation area, someplace where they lived. Most of the sites are just points, Crowfield points, arrowheads, if you will, spear points, that are found in a field. with no context and no organic material to be found with them. See, our areas up through here are so acidic that bone preservation is almost unknown. So we don't find bone, we don't find antler, we don't find wood, which is really too bad. All we find are the lithics, and you can't date lithics that way. So it's very hard to find it.
Speaking
now,
of lithics,
these are Crowfield. There we go. Speaking of which, these are Crowfield points. Crowfield, as you can see in the center, there are flutes. Those are called flutes. So they're taking after their earlier cousins, the Clovis people. So these are the last of the fluted points. Some people called them pumpkin seed points. They're smaller than Clovis. They're extremely thin, very thin, like almost insanely thin points. So they break often, but these are Crowfield points, and that is typical of the Crowfield culture. Now, why are they so thin? It's thought that in order to get between the ribs of the caribou, that their points had to be thin enough to be able to penetrate through the ribs, slide through, and hopefully hit a nice vital organ. So you can go on to the next. All right, this is our cluster here. We call it the Owlville cluster, and this is the cluster in Madison County. And you can see the different colors of dots. Now, what those different dots represent are sites, okay? You have the north side of the road and the south side of the road. There are 1, 2, 3, 4 different sites on the north side of the road and 7 on the south side of the road. Now, the dots represent where I or we have found artifacts. So you can see there's gaps, okay? So people often ask, all right, Mike, there's 37 acres here with all these sites. How do you know where to dig? Well, every time I'm out in the field and I find something, walking in the plowed fields this is, we put down a marker, a flag, and then the New York State comes on out with a Trimble machine, which is a GPS machine, and they can actually pin down where the artifact was. Now, you're not going to believe this, to within 4 centimeters of where we found it. So eventually, if you log enough of these, and we've logged over 2,000 artifact finds from this grouping of sites, you can see where the best place to dig is. So if you go on to the next. Okay, that shows Susan Winchell-Sweeney from the State Museum, the machine that she's working with, and they're working with a Trimble machine, which uses both American and Russian satellites. And that's how we can GPS coordinate all of the artifacts that we find. And if you want to move to the next. And this is what happens. We dig several times a year, usually in June and then September. And we have up to as many as 80 volunteers who will come out in the middle of this field. The fields are our farmer who works with us actually leaves a chunk of the field unplanted so that every year, so we can come in and do the work. Now, most of the site, and for years we thought the site was limited to the plow zone, maybe 8-10 inches deep, and that's all. If you'd show the next one. Next slide. Yeah. Oh, whoa. We found 2 years ago a pit. And usually in the plow zone, in a meter square, 1 meter by 1 meter, we might find 15 to 20 artifacts, maybe 10, not a lot. But this particular pit kept going down and down and down, and it's down approximately 4 feet. And we don't know why they made it, but they put we're up to almost 400 flakes and artifacts out of this pit. The artifacts include scrapers. And so obviously they were doing a lot of hide preparation here. That's what scrapers would do. So we were able to get some organics, what we think are organics, out of the bottom of this pit. And that may give us, Chris, the first dating, maybe the first dating ever for the Crowfield culture. but it was certainly fun to explore this deep, deep feature, which is so highly unusual. Why did they make it? We don't know yet. You can show the next one. These are some of the artifacts that we find. These are all Crowfield artifacts. So because the Crowfield culture is so rare, every time we find an artifact, it tells us a little bit more about the types of tools that they used. Going from the left top, you have a beaked, what they called a beaked scraper for scraping and digging. It could be an incising tool for wood. Then you have a typical end scraper. The third item is a broken Crowfield point. That's a spear point, the first fluted point I ever found in my life. And then you have what is called a bifacial or a unifacial scraper. It converges from two areas to a point. These are extraordinarily rare. But again, not real flashy stuff, but these are some of the earliest artifacts in central New York. So if you want to go on to the next.
Sure. Before, are we done with the Crowfield, or
Sure.
we have more? Because I had some
Yeah,
questions about that.
I think that's the end of the Crowfield. Yep. If anybody has anything on that.
Sure. Yeah, there's definitely questions that we want to get to on the Crowfield. Let's get rid of
Sure.
this picture here and put you over
Okay.
here. Rid of this picture here, and then let everybody know your name again. So let's just talk about the Crowfields for a second, then we'll go to some of the
Sure.
more interesting finds that you've had. Again, we're not sure of the dates, but do we have a date range of the Crowfield?
Yeah, Crowfield is about 12,200 to roughly 11,900 years ago. So they're roughly 1,000 years after the Clovis people. And there were other people in here between those two, but we don't have time to get into that right now.
Do we know what happened to the Crowfield after 1,000 years, or after they were gone? Or where did they go to?
No idea.
No idea.
No, we really don't know. It's assumed, that they probably moved on, went someplace else, but there are no additional Crowfield sites that have ever been found. Now, there's probably more out there, but this particular culture, that's why it's so enigmatic. Just not a lot of evidence for them.
How about the Clovis people? Do we know more about them?
Yes, because Clovis was a much broader, basically Crowfield is Ontario, Canada, and New York State. Basically, that's it. Where the Clovis people were literally across the United States, all the way from Washington State, all the way to Maine, up into Canada, down, believe it or not, as far as Venezuela. Now, we could go on for a long time about Clovis, but here's the deal. How did a culture, Clovis, they figured lasted from roughly 13,000 years ago, maybe 13,300 years ago, down to about maybe 12,900, okay? So about 400 years. How in goodness name could a culture spread coast to coast, continent to continent in 400 years? And there's no real good answer to that, but some really smart people think that Clovis wasn't so much a culture as a belief, as a philosophy, which spreads a lot faster than actual people spreading. That the belief spread, and the belief dealt with making these beautiful fluted points, hunting mammoths, hunting mastodons. That there are a number of features that we could talk about the Clovis people. Interesting, the Clovis people probably came through the Bering land bridge. All right, so how do you explain the fact that more Clovis points are found in the southeastern part of the United States than in the western part? Oh, they're fun mysteries, Chris, and literally every month something new is found.
What happened to the Clovis people? How did they disappear?
Well, and no one, not so much they disappeared. Clovis people probably transitioned into other cultures. Barnes is another one that's in there. And there are a number of subcultures. There are points that are similar to Clovis, but then they begin to change. And that finally culminates in our friends, the Crowfields, who still thought it was important to make fluted points, but they didn't follow they didn't follow the Clovis mantra. They were thinner, they were smaller, because probably they had different uses for them. They were more interested in going between the ribs of the caribou, whereas the Clovis people needed the bigger, heavier points. The logic is to go after perhaps the mammoths, the mastodons, and some of the bigger prey.
How far south were the mastodons? Did they go all the way into Central America?
Oh yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
I didn't know
South
that.
America.
Oh, wow.
There's other, yeah, there were other types of them, gomphers, things along that line. But yes, you can find mammoths and mastodons right down through into the northern part of South America.
Let's go back to your own story, your favorite stories, I should say. So remember, we'll just remind everybody that Mike's journey started on Frontenac Island when he was a kid. And it's taken him to all sorts of interesting things in the central New York region. But, you know, there's not too much difference between Western New York and central New York. So tell us some of your favorite things. And I've got some pictures here. You just tell me which ones to put up, and I will.
Well, we've been very lucky again, once Dad and I realized that there were Native American items to be found. Dad went out, we bought every book we could find. We learned everything. I went to college for archaeology. So we really tried to make it a study, and we realized how special it was. I grew up in Auburn, and we spent so much time as a family along the Seneca River, looking for sites and looking for artifacts. And then back 47 years ago, I moved to Madison County because I got married, and have found about 80 different sites in northern Madison County, and that were totally unknown. Nobody spent much time in Madison County. The sites are harder to find. So if you want to go to, I think it's slide 20, I'll show you a couple of our favorites. Okay, now this is Farley's Point, New York. It's on Cayuga Lake. And if you see that little dot in the water way at the top of the screen, that's Frontenac Island. So my buddy had a camp on Farley's Point, right out on the point that you see the center, right, if you will, right in the center. And his neighbor wanted to put in a new driveway. So he had a bulldozer come in, and this was Memorial Day weekend in 1968. So it goes back, I'm dating myself here. The bulldozer took a couple of swipes and a skull came up. The neighbor, who was very kind, said, look at, and he knew that we were interested in artifacts and Indian, and he said, look, I'll stop the bulldozer. I'll bring him back Monday or Tuesday after the holiday, and you guys can dig. Well, we contacted the Cayuga Museum. We contacted anybody that we could to come help us, and being a holiday weekend, nobody could. Professor Long came over from the museum in Auburn, and he kind of supervised for a while, but then he had to leave. We dug for 3 days, Chris, day and night, and we excavated 5 burials to save them because they would have been destroyed if you do the next grouping. So we had 5 individuals, and these are some of the artifacts. Again, this is 1968, that were with these individuals. Now, the strange thing here is that there was no site right in the area. These 5 individuals, plus there was a dog in the burial, these 5 individuals were basically facing east, and we did the best that we could to preserve through notes, through pictures, and everything we could. Then we took the bones, the skeletons, and buried them in a safe place where they would never be disturbed again. On Tuesday, the bulldozer came back, and the entire area was destroyed. So we kind of salvaged these, I guess you'd say. And a couple of my favorite artifacts, you can see the antlers of a deer, and there was the tines of a 10-point buck were in the burial. In this grouping, there's at the bottom of the screen, there is a chipstone axe. Just above that, that circular item that you see is a handmade bead. It is an 8-sided bead. I can't imagine how long that would have taken. You can see a drill in the lower left. You can see above that is a bone harpoon. In this case, around Cayuga County, because of the high level of lime in the soil, bone is preserved. But my favorite artifact of mine of all time is the bird effigy that you see. It's got the FP on it for Farley's Point. The slate bird effigy, left middle. These people had a rough life just to stay alive. And somebody created a piece of art that looks very modern, even by today's standards. I'll tell you, anytime I hold that, I get tingles right now, because yeah, anybody can find arrowheads, anybody can find axes, but when you find a piece of art, that meant something to someone, and it really spoke to me. There it is again. It's not very big, but to me, that is an amazing artifact. It's somebody talking to us from about 1,500 years ago. This is the intrusive mound culture, so this is 10,000 years after the Crowfield people. If you want to show the next one. This is the O'Neill farm, north of the Seneca River. If you really got good eyes, behind the tree, you can see the glint of the Seneca River behind you. And this is part of the drumlin area. And what you're looking at is you're looking south, and that is a drumlin that runs right on down to the Seneca River. The intrusive mound culture believed in burying their dead in other people's mounds. So they didn't make their own mounds like the Adena. They were from Ohio area, like the Adena and Hopewell. Well, if you look carefully, you can see that these look like mounds. I mean, this would look like mounds to people who were traveling in this area. If you flip to the next screen, this is a banner stone. This is made out of banded red and green slate. There's a hole in the center of it. And these were usually worn around probably the neck, perhaps draped from a pole, as a symbol, perhaps of strength, power. I can't imagine using stone tools, how long this would have taken. This is my mother's favorite find, and she found it at the end of that drumlin at the O'Neill farm, which again is just amazing. So that's Mom's favorite find. And if you want to flip to the next, probably the most incredible find that we ever made. This is a pipe made out of steatite, or some people call it soapstone. It has engravings and etchings on it. It has a handle at the bottom. It has a very short platform and then a tall pipe bowl. Chris, this was found in a plowed field. So how the tractor wheels did not crush it is astonishing. But it's so finely made that you can hold it to the light and you can see the sides are translucent. It's been worn quite a bit, so we're guessing this may have been a generational artifact, something that was treasured and kept perhaps for generations. If you want to show the last. And these are the cat people, whatever, that are holding hands going around the bowl of the pipe. They're incised into the pipe, so you have pointy ears, you have a square head, you have squared shoulders, you have narrow hips, probably a loincloth of some nature, and then a symbol to the far right. What do these mean? We have no idea in the world. However, here again, just like our bird from Farley's Point, this is speaking to us. These are people 1,500, 2,000 years ago who made this piece of art. And to me, these are the most wonderful artifacts. They're New York State treasures. All of these will be donated to the New York State Museum. because they're only mine for a short time, and they belong to all New Yorkers. So, and that's it.
All right. Well, Mike, thank you very much. And thank you for bearing with our little technology challenges as we've...
We challenge you to consider
there we go. Let's get rid of that one. I don't know how that happens, but it does. Let's see. If we do this one, does it happen? Yes, it does. So we're not going to do this one either. But thank you for bearing with us in, like I say, as you just experienced once again, our technology challenges. So I'm just going to keep the picture on you until the very end. Thank you, everybody, for listening live and asking your questions. If you would like to do that, then just go to stateof.greaterwesternyork.com. You can sign up. It's free. And then every Thursday morning, you'll get the personal invitation with the super secret link to be able to see the show live, where you can ask the guest questions. If you don't want to watch it live, that's fine too. We archive the show on our website, stateof.greaterwesternyork.com. And it's also rebroadcast every Sunday at 1:30. If you like our Facebook page, you'll be reminded when it's rebroadcast there. If you prefer YouTube, you can go there and watch it at 1:30 on Sunday. Again, you'll be reminded if you are a subscriber to that. Let's see. I think so. This has been a special show, a little bit longer, because we're going to take a 2-week break for the holidays. We want to thank everybody again for being here. Mike, thank you very much for taking the extra time to really go over this very interesting material on the first New Yorkers and beyond, really, if you think about it. A lot of interesting stuff. And if I'm sure we're going to get more questions as we go on and people see the show, they'll put it in the comments or whatever. And I'll let you know if anything interesting pops up, and maybe we can explore that too. So again,
thanks, Chris. I appreciate you asking me to be on your program.
All right. Have a great holiday. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye for now.
You too.